Number 5 and number 6 kind of go together in a trope I like to call the mystery train, because if a murder or serious crime has been committed in an enclosed space of a train, then someone on board must know something about it, right? It's a great Hercule Poirot style cliche that never gets old. But anyway, Professor Layton and the Diabolical Box. Herschel Layton's mentor, Dr. Schrader, calls Layton over, saying that he's tracked down the legendary Diabolical Box, which is said to kill all who open it. When Layton and Luke arrive, the box is missing and Schrader lies dead in the room. No time for an autopsy apparently, so the only clue is a ticket for the Mulantary Express, another really luxurious locomotive with its own mysteries to solve. But luckily, Professor Layton is a lot more capable than an Adele penguin. About half of this adventure takes place on the Mulantary. It serves not only to get Layton to major plot points, but it's also a small, safe area to get accustomed to the investigative style of the game, and to start developing a lot of characters who will serve a bigger purpose throughout the game. We reunite with Flora, who has been following Layton since the last game, and we meet the train's founder, the curmudgeon Mr. Beluga, and his punk rock nephew, Sammy Thunder, who is the train's conductor and a lovable, hapless idiot. This being the second game in the series, the developers did a much better job with tying the puzzles with the situations in the game, including one instance where Layton has to help Sammy maneuver the Mulantary around another train coming from the opposite direction. Good thing Layton was there to catch that, or we might have hit an oncoming train. Seriously, Sammy, you almost killed us all. So why did Dr. Schrader have this ticket? Why do the passengers occasionally just pass out? And what is the meaning of this secret stop that the train allegedly takes? Well, I'm not about to spoil a Professor Layton game for all of you. Go out and play these games for yourselves, guys. The market needs your support. For number 4, I'm putting the automatic railway systems from the Half-Life games. Yeah, you're going to want an explanation on this one, so I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but I assure you, this will all relate back to trains. These games have a really novel way of telling a story, mainly due to a pair of key factors. 1, from start to finish, you see and know everything that your character Gordon Freeman sees. Half-Life 1 through 2 Part 2 is a non-stop story where the only passages of time are when Gordon is asleep or otherwise unconscious. 2, the game never stops for traditional cutscenes. Even when Gordon is tied up, you still at least have control of what you're looking at. Thanks to clever scripting, the game can keep players in a room to experience the plot without having to take control from them. How do you accomplish something like this? You put them on a train. The train at the beginning of Half-Life is the opposite of the Animal Crossing intro. As an intercom teaches you about what Black Mesa is, you, like Gordon, are just sitting around on the train waiting for your stop. However, if this is your first playthrough, you'll most likely be running up to the windows trying to sneak a peek at all the crazy stuff that's going on around you, taking in the bleak atmosphere and the sense that something is going to go horribly wrong. The build-up this creates is staggering. At the end of the first game, you defeat the big bad Vortigaunt and are approached by the space-bending G-Man, who very cryptically tells you that his employers need him as part of their big, mysterious plot. You get the choice to help him or die, and at the end of the game, just as it began, on a train, heading to the next big location. Gordon is then put into some kind of stasis until the G-Man needs him again, leading to...
Wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
You didn't miss a thing. At least not from Freeman's perspective. You just wake up on yet another train, heading towards the next stop on Freeman's adventure. As detailed as the environments of the Half-Life games are, one thing that sticks out is that they are very linear. Some people use this as a complaint, but look a little deeper. In many areas of both games, there's this weird secret. Look into the distance and you might catch a glimpse of the G-Man, always a step ahead of you, almost subconsciously leading you along. And in the thrilling conclusion of both games, the G-Man freezes you in place telepathically and, for the first time, you can't do anything but stand there and listen. After all the supposed freedom you had during the other cutscenes, having the G-Man put his foot down makes you feel downright violated. And therein lies the brilliance. Half-Life gives the illusion of choice, but you're always doing exactly what the G-Man wants. You ever hear of the term railroaded? Well, you may have gotten off the tram at the beginning of each game, but ladies and gentlemen, you're still on a train. This game series is a train. Now, if you'll please pick up the pieces of your mind that I just blew, we can proceed to number 3. Okay, we've had our fair share of symbolism and ingenuity, but what we really want is a Last Crusade style action level. There are some great side-scrolling levels based on these vehicles, but the only real choice is that show-stopping level from Uncharted 2, Chapter 13, Locomotion. The Uncharted series is, after all, very akin to those same film serials that inspired Indiana Jones. Games like Red Steel 2 did levels like this where they gave that sense that you were on a moving train. But this... look at this! Naughty Dog really outdid themselves with this one. In fact, this scene alone nearly forced the development team to its breaking point as they struggled to keep the frame rate down. Because essentially, this is a level that drives through a bigger level. The train starts in the lush, humid jungles of Tibet. You always have that freedom to choose how to get to the next car, scaling the rooftops or running inside the cars, but the guards will use the same tactics to try to stop you, and all hell breaks loose when an attack copter gets in on the action, constantly firing a minigun that forces you to utilize any form of cover, and blowing up each car with rockets so that you have to keep up the pace. You'll be relieved when the train makes it along the tunnel away from that pesky aircraft. The subterranean segment brings even more fun if you can find a sniper rifle. Your sniping skills are really put to the test here, as the weaving train and the walls on the tunnel come into play while trying to line up your shot. When you see that light at the end of the tunnel, you're probably expecting the stage to loop back to the jungle, but instead you are greeted with the frozen landscapes of the Himalayas. Suddenly, the precarious nature of climbing alongside of the moving train has become even more precarious now that the bottomless pits are thrown in. But at least there's no sight of that oh wait. Normally with train levels in an action game, the player is confined to a straight hallway to ensure the experience is how the programmers intended. This technical marvel of game design alternatively challenges the player to think outside the boxcar and use what they've learned about the game in a new environment with new unique challenges. And although the segment ends with a rather frustrating mini-boss, it's forgivable considering the sheer amount of adrenaline involved with this climb. It's really a miracle this level even exists, and if the rest of the Uncharted series is half as good as this, I got some great games to look forward to. Part of what makes Final Fantasy VI so compelling is the story. Lots of RPGs do the steampunk thing now because steampunk is cool, but Final Fantasy VI has a narrative reason for it. After the Great War, all magic on the planet disappeared, so society had to develop without it, necessitating for more focus on technology. So by the time Terra is found and magic is reintroduced into the world, society is already at a sort of industrial revolution. Ergo, it is totally plausible that chainsaws and cranes are just as accessible as fire spells and health potions. So maybe 10 hours into the game, Sabin, Scion, and Shadow, if you hired him, are trying to escape Doma, Scion's homeland. Scion is heartbroken of the loss of not only his country, but his wife and son. Eventually, they find a mysterious station in the middle of the woods and board a train. This being a Final Fantasy game, the place is full of random encounters, but what's more pervasive is this atmosphere. The music alone tells you that something isn't right, and before long you start running into these weird specters. Some of them ignore you, some of them attack you, and some, with nary a word, join your party. Who are these benevolent banshees? Not even the HUD knows. The Phantom Train, as it turns out, carries the dead from this world to whatever happens next. Clearly this isn't somewhere you want to be right now. Sabin and the gang fight through several cars before jumping on top and fighting more ghouls on the roof. Then the train itself starts talking to the party, threatening to carry them for trying to cheat death. Yeah, the boss battle here is against a train, with Sabin, Scion, and Shadow running for dear life while the funeral engine rides hot on their heels. The boss battle isn't all that difficult and you can end it just by dropping a phoenix down on it, but the scenario itself and Sabin's ability to suplex the damn thing adds this to one of the many memorable events in Final Fantasy VI. And you never really kill the train anyway. I mean, you can't kill death. The train just decides to let you go, but just before leaving, Scion catches a glimpse of his family making their last departure. Scion's had it pretty rough so far, but this cruel twist of fate just beats him into the ground like a rail spike. In the later scenario, you have to save Scion from a deep slumber by traveling into his subconscious, which at one manifests into cars of the train. But again, why a train? Well, I tend to think of it this way. In the world of Final Fantasy VI, there was always this force that brings the deceased to the next life, like a Grim Reaper or something. As the wars in the game's backstory destroyed all the traces of magic, that doesn't mean that there is no longer death. So as nature adapted, death changed its form, eventually inhabiting a train as part of the society's new industrial motif. And as a form of transport, this metaphysical concept vaguely poses that death may be less of an ending and more of a destination. What happens to people when their HP hits 0 and they're out of Phoenix Downs? We can never really know. And how is it that Scion just happened upon this train in the first place? Could it be that he was at his lowest point, having just lost everyone, his country, his family? And perhaps was even contemplating killing himself when he conveniently found this train? The Phantom Train has made a lot of cameos in other Final Fantasy titles, and for good reason. There's just so much intrigue to this concept. Come on guys, this is me we're talking about. We all knew where this was headed. I admit to being a little skeptical when Spirit Tracks was announced. The whole existence of trains didn't really seem to fit in the Zelda universe. But the more I thought about it, it actually makes perfect sense. I mean, Spirit Tracks takes place 100 years after Wind Waker, and that game had permanent image portable photography, which we didn't invent until around 1839. On the other hand, we've had steam engines since 1804, so don't go saying it's too technologically advanced for Zelda. Not to mention, Spirit Tracks takes place in New Hyrule, 100 years after the events of Wind Waker. Long ago, the Locomo inhabited this continent and waged war against the Demon King Malladus. They sealed him beneath the ground using a mixture of mysticism and gadgetry, and the seals that crisscross the land just happened to double as great railway systems. So, for number 1, I'm picking the Spirit Train. Not just as a gameplay mechanic or a plot device, but as a concept for the entire game. The Spirit Train replaces Phantom Hourglass's steamship, which at first might seem like a downgrade. On the SS Linebeck, you could plot your course from anywhere in all 8 directions, sail around in crazy patterns, and in theory you had more freedom, but that just meant that the game needed more contrived ways from keeping you from skipping ahead to the next area. Let's look at this in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, just riding from one location to the next, your train will follow the track ahead automatically, letting you focus on the enemies all around you. There's also the occasional invasion of phantom trains, fellow locomotives that have been overtaken by Malladus. These bad boys try to block your path, and a collision results in an immediate death. What seemed like a brainless ride through the countryside suddenly becomes a tense game of cat and mouse, where each intersection becomes a tactical ultimatum. Think of it like Pac-Man, but you have a mounted cannon. Traveling the overworld in a Zelda game usually isn't the most exciting part of the experience, but in Spirit Tracks, these rides can be just as exciting as the dungeons they lead you to. But let's look more long-term. Why can't I go to the volcano right away? Well, because those tracks are missing. There's a clear pattern that Spirit Tracks follows for the game progression. Visiting the Spirit Tower, rebuilding the tracks, going to the dungeons to fix the next part of the Spirit Tower. Maybe it's a little repetitive, but it's repetitive in a way that makes a lot of sense, at least in the logic of the game's story. Malladus is sealed under Hyrule, so these tracks are sort of like chains keeping it closed, and the tower is basically a big combination lock. But the tower has multiple pieces, sort of like a multi-pad lock. So every time you restore the next part of the lock, it lets you secure several more chains. This entire game basically takes place on a giant puzzle box if you think about it. Even side questing feeds into the system. Taking deliveries or escorting civilians can earn you crystals that unlock more tracks. All the jobs you do make actual changes to the world, in that you can then visit past passengers living in their new homes and so on. Sure, with a boat at sea format, these places could have been open to begin with, but then there wouldn't be that rewarding feeling of excitement to finally see what a long-lost station holds. Outside of maybe one of those boring train simulator games, I can't think of another game that based so much of its story, mechanics, and design on railway travel. All of the Locomo have funny train-related names, there are tons of customizable train parts you can craft, and one of the battles towards the end of the game is a surprisingly thrilling fight with the Demon Train, which is up there as one of the all-time great Zelda bosses in my opinion. Spirit Tracks takes what could have been a stupid gimmick and expands it into a major theme of the game, and in this case, it worked. Because if there's one thing this countdown taught me, it's that trains are cool. We've seen them used as a story element, as an alternative to cutscenes, as a setting, as a level, as a boss, as an embodiment of death, and in the case of the #1 greatest train in gaming history, as an entire game's foundation. I'm the Green Scorpion, and if there's anything to take away from this, is that in the minds of great game designers, a silly concept can evolve into limitless possibilities. Because sure, these trains are stuck to a track, but the human imagination certainly isn't. Take that to heart, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
Dr. Octagon,